This is not going to be the usual kind of historical documentary. Such productions are fine in their own right, but this particular documentary will have a personal point of view because it's about the house I live in. When I was looking for a place to live in early 2022, I chose a house at 132 Wayside Avenue because I could afford it, and it had almost every other attribute I'd been hoping for. However, the realtor didn't know much about its history, and neither did the seller, who was liquidating her brother's estate. There were a couple of guesses based on the layout of the large room on the first floor. Someone thought it must have been a barber shop. Another guess was that it might have been a beauty parlor. However, my research revealed that it had never been either one of those. Instead, it was known and beloved in the community for many years as the Hause Grocery Store. Most of the people living today remember the building at 132 Wayside Avenue as the Hause Grocery Store, but it actually had several lives before then. Its earliest history is hard to trace because most people don't realize the history that is happening as they're living it. Fortunately for my research, the Sanborn Fire Insurance Company made a lot of maps over the years, and I was able to find an image of how the property appeared in a map from 1897. It was shown as a blank space on Wayside Avenue, between an alleyway and Mulberry Street. The 1904 map looks much the same, an empty block. However, the Hagerstown City records show that a building was built at that location in the year 1905, and it appears on the Sanborn map from 1910. The owner is identified as J. Lohr, and the building is described as a cigar box factory. However, the long, narrow shape of the building is very different from the shape of the building today. As far as I can tell, it was originally a single-story brick construction heated with anthracite coal. Although I did not find any photographs of the original building, I did receive a 1962 newspaper photograph of a painting made by future owner Nelson Hause of the building as it appeared when it was a cigar box factory. I cleaned up the image using an artificial intelligence program. The original caption reads, "Painting recreates cigar box factory." Reproduced above is the major detail of an oil painting by Nelson L. Hause, local grocer with a penchant for painting, showing the old Lohr's Cigar Box Factory at 132 Wayside Avenue as it looked back in 1910. Built 5 years previously by John Lohr, it was operated as a factory by his son Ralph. Hause remembers the factory as a major source of sticks for kites among North End boys in 1910. At that time, the factory's employee roster included Wilma Dorman, Lelia Minnick, Laura Hoover, Hazel Saum, William H. Gold, and Pansy Hoover, who later became Mrs. Ralph Lohr. The factory was operated by Levi Beiser from 1916 through 1918, after which John Long converted it into a restaurant serving the girls' high school then located at Broadway School. In 1924, Lohr turned it into Lohr's Sweet Shop, the name under which it operated until 1934 when Nelson Hause equipped it as a grocery store. Hause still operates a grocery business in the building, which also serves as a residence for him and his wife. The two windows in front were most likely there as a source of daylight. They were later replaced by the large display-type window that remains to this day. The double doors at the side probably allowed for receipt of box construction materials as well as sending out the finished boxes. The doors were probably useful for later businesses as well. Although the 1910 map lists gas, I found over 100 pounds of pebble-sized anthracite coal still lying in the crawl space of the unfinished dirt basement when I moved in. The caked coal residue on parts of the crawl space ceiling provided further evidence of the original heating method. The building probably used the gas for lighting, since the early knob and tube electrical wiring began to arrive around 1910. I did find quite a lot of old knob and tube wiring along the basement ceiling below what had been the factory floor. I didn't find much information about the cigar box factory, probably because they manufactured for cigar makers rather than the general public. One Facebook respondent provided me with some possible examples with the comment, "Thomas H. Porter was a cigar manufacturer in Hagerstown before 1930, a booming business on West Washington Street even as early as 1908, as I recall reading. I imagine Champion may have made his cigar boxes, as I found one many years ago at a flea market and purchased it because I never knew such an enterprise was in town." A city directory from 1908 to 1909 shows both the Champion Box Factory as a manufacturer and Thomas H. Porter as a cigar retailer on the same page. I found some of the city directories at the Washington County Historical Society showing listings for the Champion Box Factory. The 1918 Sanborn map reveals a tiny addition by the rear of the property. As of now, that's the kitchen, so I suspect that construction of a second floor was started around that time. The stairs leading to the second floor are situated outside the original brick, and they slope away from the wall, probably to help rainwater flow away from what was then the building itself. The 1926 Sanborn map shows more additions, and the building appears to have attained its present overall configuration. My other research revealed that several other things happened during those years. The 1905 to 1906 city directory shows John Lohr, cigar box maker, but his residence is a block away at 134 Broadway. I found a copy of a handwritten deed showing the land being conveyed to Jacob E. Fisher by Jesse O. Snyder on March 5, 1906. Then on May 11, 1907, a deed conveyed to Riddenauers by Jacob and Hattie Fisher. The 1908 to 1909 city directory showed the first listing of Champion Box Factory, J.N.O. Lohr, prop for proprietor. On April 16, 1910, the deed was conveyed to Jenny Lohr by William and Edna Riddenauer. The 1915 to 1916 directory listed Champion Box Factory and John Lohr, prop. proprietor. They finally got his name right, but his home was now listed at 603 North Mulberry Street, so it appears that the building was still just a factory. However, on April 19, 1916, John Lohr died at the age of 72. He left his wife, Jenny Lohr, a son, Ralph Emerson Lohr, and a grandson, Alvin Russell Lohr. As of October 1918, John's widow, Jenny H. Lohr, was still residing at 603 North Mulberry Street. The 1922 to 1923 city directory shows Champion Box Factory, Levi Beiser, at the rear of 128 Wayside Avenue, the building across the alleyway. My guess is that the relocation was related to the construction of the second floor and the installation of an oil heater. I have two reasons for this guess. First, the stamp on the bottom of the clawfoot bathtub on the second floor shows a date of December 1922. Second, the oil burner and oil tank were still in the basement when I bought the house, bearing a tag from Burnham in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and Burnham's commercial facility opened in 1923. The Sanborn map from 1926 shows something else. The building is no longer identified as a cigar box factory. Instead, each of the two sections is marked with an S, which is short for store. The 1929 city directory makes it even clearer. 132 Wayside Avenue now lists three entities: Lohr's Sweet Shop, Lohr, Ralph E., Confectioner, and Lohr, Alvin R. Antiques. By the 1920s, wooden cigar boxes were starting to be replaced by cheaper cardboard boxes. This may have been a factor for Ralph Lohr changing the family business from a box factory to a confectionery store. The 1930 census does show a listing for Ralph E. Lohr, owner, confectionery store. Then, the August 15, 1930 Hagerstown Morning Herald had a listing on page 19. Wanted to buy. Antiques wanted. All kinds, all descriptions. What have you? Alvin Lohr, 132 Wayside Avenue. Phone 17383. This goes back to a time before telephone numbers had area codes. The 1932 Hagerstown phone directory shows Lohr, Ralph E. Sweet Shop, 132 Wayside Avenue, number 1728-J in both the white pages and the yellow pages under Confectionery Business, Retail, along with Lohr's Antique Shop, 132 Wayside Avenue, number 1728-J under Antique Business. The fact that the years from 1930 through 1935 were also the hardest times of the Great Depression suggests that the buying public was not able to support either a sweet shop or an antique business. However, a newspaper article from August 23, 1948 shows that there were other problems even earlier in 1928. 20 years ago, Lohr's Sweet Shop, Wayside Avenue, reported to the police this morning that approximately $15 in cash and upwards of 200 old coins were stolen from the shop several days ago. The store has been robbed a number of times lately. I found an announcement on microfilm. Nelson Leroy Hause opens grocery store at 132 Wayside Avenue. A contract grant was issued from Ralph E. Lohr and his wife, Pansy V. Lohr, to Nelson L. Hause. The contract of sale was recorded on March 21st, 1935, and a deed appears dated April 30th, 1935. The sale price was $3,100. I got additional details from an issue of The Cracker Barrel, which I'll quote. One could almost believe that Nelson and Mary Hause invented the neighborhood grocery store. Since Nelson first opened the door on August 2nd, 1934, the little store has practically become an institution to the many people who have known it and shopped here. During those early days before Nelson was married, his parents and sister used to give him a hand in the shop, and it was his sister, Mrs. Asher Edelman, who used to tend the shop while Nelson traveled over to Frederick to court his future bride, Mary Kiefer. After they were married, Mary became Nelson's right arm in their growing family grocery. Their customers were always more than just people who came to buy merchandise. They were friends who came as much to chat as to buy. Nelson and Mary liked it that way. I'll have more from that article later. This is a good point in the history to tell a little bit more about Nelson Leroy Hause. He was born on January 30th, 1906. He had an older sister, Ethel May, who married Asher Edelman, establishing a familial link between the Hause and Edelman families that lasted for decades. Born on July 30th, 1901, Ethel passed away on January 27, 1987. A newspaper article from April 23, 1926, lists Nelson Hause as a participant in an event at the YMCA. He is listed as a member of one of the boys' swimming teams. He is also mentioned in a July 17, 1929 article about a picnic held by the Young Women's Missionary Society of the St. John's Lutheran Church. Nelson Hause was one of the attendees, and the picnic was described as a weenie and marshmallow roast. Attending the outdoor picnic had an element of risk because, according to one of Mr. Hause's nieces, Nelson Hause had a bee allergy and would become concerned whenever anyone else got stung. She also said, Uncle Nelson had a fantastic sense of humor, rather goofy, with a smile and laugh for everyone. Over the years, Nelson Hause was a member of St. John's Lutheran Church, a former church councilman, and a member of the men's Bible class of the church. He was also a member of Morris Frock Post No. 42 of the American Legion, a former Grand Noble of the Order of Oddfellows, a member of the Christian Ardinger chapter of the SAR, and a member of both the Hagerstown Art Club and First Hose Fire Company. At one time, Nelson's father, Charles E. Hause, lived across the street at 131 Wayside Avenue. However, the 1930 census shows both Charles and Nelson Hause residing at 104 Wayside Avenue, the western end of the same block. Shortly after Nelson Hause received the contract grant and deed, Nelson married Mary E. Kiefer in Frederick, Maryland. I found the first notice on microfilm from the Daily Mail dated June 1st, 1935. Miss Kiefer will marry Mr. Hause. Ceremony to take place in Frederick tomorrow morning. A quiet and simple wedding will take place tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock in the Evangelical Lutheran Church, Frederick, when Miss Mary Elizabeth Kiefer, the daughter of Mrs. Frank B. Kiefer, Frederick, and Nelson Leroy Hause, the son of Mr. and Mrs. C. E. Hause, this city, will be married. The church will be beautifully decorated with flowers, and the Reverend Amos Traver will perform the ceremony. Asher Edelman, brother-in-law of the groom, will give a short recital of appropriate wedding music preceding the service, and will play Barnaby's lovely hymn, O Love Divine, while the service is being read. Miss Kiefer will wear a gown of white mousseline crepe and will carry white roses. Immediately after the ceremony, the couple will leave on a trip to Boston and the New England states. The bride's going-away costume will be a pink suit with brown accessories. The couple will be at home to their many friends at 132 Wayside Avenue after June 14th. I found a second notice from the Morning Herald on June the 3rd, 1935. Miss Kiefer and Mr. Hause marry. Pretty ceremony is performed at Frederick Church. A quiet and simple wedding took place yesterday morning at 9 o'clock in the Evangelical Lutheran Church, Frederick, when Miss Mary Elizabeth Kiefer, the daughter of Mrs. Frank B. Kiefer, Frederick, and Nelson Leroy Hause, the son of Mr. and Mrs. C. E. Hause, this city, were married. The church was beautifully decorated with flowers, and the Reverend Amos Traver performed the ceremony. Asher Edelman, brother-in-law of the groom, rendered a short recital of appropriate wedding music preceding the service, and played Barnaby's lovely hymn, O Love Divine, while the service was being read. Miss Kiefer wore a gown of white mousseline crepe and carried white roses. Immediately after the ceremony, the couple left on a trip to Boston and the New England states. The bride's going-away costume was a pink suit with brown accessories. The couple will be at home to their many friends at 132 Wayside Avenue after June 14th. It appears that either the wedding ceremony proceeded exactly as planned, or the editor just updated the previous text. At any rate, I couldn't help noticing the absence of any mention of what Mr. Hause wore. However, I am confident that, at a minimum, trousers were involved. I also noted the couple's expected return home after June 14th. That reinforces my belief that the second-floor living area was already in place. I found another small article in the Daily Mail dated June 10th, 1935. Mr. and Mrs. Nelson Hause have returned from their wedding trip in the New England states and will spend several days with Mr. and Mrs. C. E. Hause before moving into their home, 132 Wayside Avenue. A nearly identical article appeared in the Morning Herald from June 11th, 1935. The only difference was that the spelling of the word wedding had been corrected. A newspaper article from August 30th, 1935 reads, Hause Grocery wins. The Hause Grocery softball team defeated the All-Stars yesterday morning in a well-played and hard-fought game, the final count being 7-6. Both teams played excellent ball afield. In the 1930s, the store was able to offer a wide variety of rather modern products. Utz's potato chips. Utz began in 1921. Knee-High. Knee-High soda was introduced in 1924. Manbeck's bread, which began January 17, 1927. Mrs. Smith's pies started around 1923. Maine's ice cream, which opened in 1922. Finally, Holzinger's meats, which had been around since sometime after 1914. A 1941 photograph shows the store in full swing, including hand-painted window art, reportedly created by Nelson Hause himself. There is even a fine colorized version from John Miller. Some sales flyers were also posted to Facebook by Doug Hornbecker. The flyers were dated March 30th, 1937, May 26th, 1937, and Spring 1948. I also received images of two more flyers, one from January 1937 and the other from March 13th, 1937. Mr. Hause created his artwork at the back of the building. However, Mr. Hause also advertised in the local newspapers. December 1936, an ad for Christmas trees. In May of 1937, an ad for hams. December 1941, an ad for candies and nuts. In July 1943, an announcement of Wednesday afternoon closings. This was probably during the time that Mr. Hause was serving in the military. December of 1946, an ad for hard mix candies. In July of 1947, 3 big specials. In June 1948, an ad for a Hussmann double display case. In July 1949, an ad for a meat case made by Kelvinator. In December of 1953, an ad for Christmas candies and nuts. In March 1958, an ad for Easter candy. In August of 1962, a 28th anniversary message. Also in August 1962, a 28th anniversary sale. And from June 1967, an ad for Maine's ice cream. A 1941 photograph shows the store in full swing, including hand-painted window art, reportedly created by Nelson Hause himself. As indicated by the artwork, it dates from around Easter of that year. Nelson Hause sits in his white apron, while his father, Charles, sits at the extreme right of the photo. Sadly, Charles was to die later that year in September. The Cracker Barrel article had more about this. Then came World War II, and Mary took care of the shop, while Nelson went off to serve his tour of duty. Members of both Nelson's and Mary's family pitched in to help her, and the store continued to prosper. After the war, Nelson was back, and it was business as usual. Nelson enjoyed taking pictures and, over the years, has photographed practically every child in the neighborhood in front of his store. A newspaper photo from the 1950s appears with the caption, "In the 1950s, neighborhood kids would hang out in front of Nelson Hause's grocery store on Wayside Avenue in Hagerstown. Hause would entertain them with his artwork, magic shows, and other antics." An article by Gloria Dahlhammer from July 28, 1971, documents one example of Hause's antics. 3 small girls wobbled into the little grocery store, teetering on their mother's cast-off high heels. They asked the owner if he would weigh their babies. The elderly grocer wiped his hands on his apron and, one by one, put the dolls onto his scales. He jotted down the weight of each. The girls politely thanked him and teetered out. They didn't buy a thing. But they're one of the reasons why Nelson Hause has been able to stay in business for almost 40 years. With a big supermarket less than 2 blocks from his modest Wayside Avenue establishment, Hause has hung on to his independent grocery business since 1934 by providing the one thing the big chain stores can't: the homey touch. Instead of attempting to match store prices, which he generally can't, Hause and his wife Mary do what most independent grocers do: give their customers personal service. If it takes 10 minutes for a youngster to decide how to spend his pennies, they take 10. If a housebound senior citizen can't get out to buy her groceries, they take her order over the phone and deliver the groceries. If they can't supply an item a customer wants, they tell her where she can get it. A fair price. I charge a fair price, Hause says. What's fair to the customer and fair to me. While chain store prices generally are lower than those he can charge and still make a profit, sometimes he does beat the prices at the supermarkets nearest him. For instance, he was selling 5 pounds of new potatoes for 43 cents last week. The supermarket was charging 69 cents. He was selling a can of tomatoes for 26 cents. The supermarket was selling its own brand at 2 cans for 55 cents or 27½ cents a can. A can of chicken noodle soup sells for 21 cents at his store, but costs only 17 cents at the bigger store. He charges $1.09 for a half-gallon of ice cream, while the supermarket sells its own brands for 75 cents and 89 cents. Hause charges 45 cents for a 1-pound can of peaches. The supermarket charges 33 cents for its brand. It's convenient. Despite the general disparity in prices, Nelson and Mary Hause say they do a good business in their neighborhood establishment. They prefer to think of it as a convenience store. People do their weekly grocery buying at the big supermarkets, Hause says, and then stop here for all the things they forgot. They have a few customers who buy all their food supplies at their store, they say, but the bulk of their business is in 2 or 3 item shopping. Typical of their customers is a gentleman who stopped in one Saturday afternoon. All he wanted was a pound of coffee. He had gone first to the supermarket, but the line at the checkout counter was too long. Too long to wait for just one item, he explained. So he stopped at Hause's Grocery, where he was waited on immediately, had a friendly chat about the weather, and bought some other items as well. But old-fashioned. Like a lot of other people accustomed to shopping at big chain stores, the gentleman was intrigued by the small family-operated store. It is not modern by supermarket standards. The produce is not displayed in mirrored, air-cooled cases. It is kept in a used refrigerator, which was moved from the Hause's apartment above the store when they bought a new one for their kitchen. The cheeses and lunch meat aren't already sliced and packaged in handy zip-out plastic wrap. They're in a 15-year-old meat case, in long loaves and big round globes, and the customer has to wait to have them sliced, weighed, and wrapped in butcher's paper. The soda pop case is water-cooled, and a customer has to dip their hand in ice to get his bottle of Coca-Cola. But what it lacks in the spit and polish of the chain store, it makes up for in other aesthetic qualities. The price tags and specials are hand-printed, often decorated with whimsical pictures drawn by Hause himself. On one shelf sits a painting of the store as it looked when it was a cigar factory in 1905, also painted by Hause. Saturday night business. The Hauses are open for business 6 days a week. They open the store at 8 a.m. and close at 6 p.m. every day but Saturday. On Saturdays, they're open until 8 p.m. I still stick to Saturday night business, Hause says, because that's when people finish their buying for the week. He closes on Friday night when the chain stores do their biggest business because he can't compete anyway. The Hauses sell a complete line of groceries, but their produce is limited to small quantities of standard items like potatoes, lettuce, celery, carrots, and cabbage. They sell fresh meats like chicken, beef, and pork only on weekends. On the other hand, they offer their customers seasonal specialties like homegrown asparagus, corn, and strawberries. At Christmas, the mincemeat and fruit cakes they advertise as homemade are exactly that. They make their own. And the store has a regular clientele from all over the county and surrounding tri-state communities for its Christmas and Easter candies, all sold loose from bushel baskets and weighed on the scales. Just folks. The Hauses say that the little storekeeper has a lot of advantages. The biggest, they think, is the opportunity to be just folks. You get to know all the people in the neighborhood and their families, Mary Hause says. And when they come into the store, you have time to talk. You don't have to rush them through. You have time to be friendly with strangers and make them feel welcome in your store. The Hauses do a big penny candy business with youngsters who attend Broadway School around the corner from their store. And one of the secrets to their success, they believe, is their policy of waiting on the customer who's next in line, even if it's a child who has only a penny to spend. Because their store is a two-man operation, they don't have labor management headaches. And because their store is small, they have very little shoplifting. I can see all over the store from behind the counter, Hause says. And since it isn't self-service, people can't walk out without paying for their merchandise. Trouble, too. There are some disadvantages for the small grocer, of course. Chief among them, Hause says, is the fact that the store, which he has operated since 1934, is confining. He and Mrs. Hause can't go on weekend jaunts. The only way they can get a vacation is to close down the business completely for 2 weeks. And it's getting tougher to stay in business with more big chain stores opening in Hagerstown and its environs. Almost 20 years ago, in 1952, the Washington County Telephone Directory listed close to 120 retail groceries in its yellow pages. The only chain stores listed were the 2 A&P stores on North Potomac Street and 2 Acme markets. By 1962, the number had dwindled to about 90. One Acme market had closed, but Food Fair and Safeway had each opened a store in Hagerstown. The 1971 telephone directory lists 88 retail groceries, but they include 4 A&P stores, 1 Acme, 2 Grand Unions, a Safeway, 6 7-Eleven stores, and a number of delicatessens. Easier now. While it's tougher to stay in business with so many big chains in operation, Nelson and Mary Hause say they don't work as hard as they did 20 or 30 years ago. For the first 5 years they were in business, they kept the store open until 11 o'clock at night. This was the neighborhood loafing place, Hause says with a grin. The working men would come in and chew tobacco and sit around and talk. In the 1930s and early 1940s, Hause periodically mimeographed and delivered 500 circulars advertising such specials as a pound of 730 coffee for 18 cents, and 2 packs of cigarettes for a quarter. They sold loose syrup and kerosene from barrels and had to dip it out by hand. During World War II, when Hause was in military service and many grocers had to close for lack of hired help, Mary Hause kept the store running with the help of relatives on both sides of the family. Admittedly, they have seen many changes in the grocery business, and they've had to adjust to the encroachment of streamlined, super-convenient supermarkets. But people don't change, they observe. They still appreciate good quality and friendly service, and in most cases, they're willing to pay a little more to get it. Hagerstown residents have shared a number of personal recollections online.
Melius, Hause, and Davidson all within 1 block on Wayside. This time of year, kids bought Halloween wax whistles at Hause, and you could hear them from a distance.
Oh yes, they had a great selection of 1-cent candy and glass bottle soda. I just lived around the corner by Broadway School, and we would use the playground hill to go snow riding. There were 5 or 6 little stores within 2 or 3 blocks, and they were all nice people. I used to go there after school and get penny candy. One Facebook poster remembers
old wooden floors and a large Coca-Cola cooler in the front of the store.
Another says,
My parents used to buy our chocolate Easter bunny from Mr. Hause.
My grandmother lived right across the street from there, and I went there for her many a time.
So many memories. Candy counter, barrel of hard pretzels, and the cold Cokes in 10-ounce bottles in the cooler with water and ice, with Paul Harvey on the radio.
Another poster notes the store was
just a small hole-in-the-wall place, but we loved stopping in for candy.
I went to Wayside from kindergarten until I think 3rd grade, then moved over to Broadway Elementary. We would stop over for penny candy on a regular basis. Another poster simply said,
Wow, I loved that store.
My mom shopped there sometimes. Mrs. Hause made great pies for Christmas and Thanksgiving. They would also special order meats from Holsinger's. I would stop in for a soda after school sometimes.
Got penny candy there when I was young.
Sometimes got my breakfast, a Crumpy's donut, there in middle school.
That was right across the street from the Wayside School. Great people.
He and his wife were so lovely to all the kids. Lots of patience. I want 1 of those, and 2 of those, and 5 of those.
Resident John Toston put it very simply.
Nelson was a nice man.
Another photo from 1964 shows a bread delivery from the Manbeck Bakery. I found a couple of other photos online, apparently from early 1971, because I also found a microfilm announcement that read, Nelson Leroy Hause retires after 39 years. Also, a classified ad message. We've retired. It has been our pleasure to serve the wonderful people of this area since 1934. We thank you, one and all. Hause Grocery, Nelson and Mary Hause. The Cracker Barrel article from June 1972 also announced the store's closing. But now, Hause Grocery is closed. May 31st, 1972 was their last formal day of business, and a lot of people will miss the little neighborhood grocery. But Nelson and Mary feel that they've earned the relaxation of retirement. Nelson won't be idle, though. He enjoys painting in oils, and he and Mary plan to do more of the things they've always wanted to do, but never had the time. The 1972 City Directory still listed Grocery Nelson L., but the 1973 directory showed Hause Nelson L. retired. Actually, Nelson Hause somehow managed to contribute time to what was then the Hagerstown Art Club. Records I obtained from the Washington County Public Library show that he joined the club in 1955 and recorded and submitted meeting reports during the next 2 years. He stayed on as a dues-paying member until the year of his death. In addition to the box factory painting, I was provided with images of a number of Mr. Hause's other creations. Here is a still life he painted in 1960. It bears his signature. Here is a much earlier work from 1944, which won second prize in a poster contest. Naturally, there was also other artwork for the grocery store, like this poster of oysters and fruitcake supplies, and a season's greetings sign. Mr. Hause also made drawings, including a sketch of a marble bust and a place called Taylor's Landing. Later, he created another depiction of Taylor's Landing as a fully realized painting. Mr. Hause's artistic sense was also reflected in his store displays. Here is an image of a display featuring a Kentucky Derby. This may have been the display that earned him a prize in a contest. Mr. Hause's art has endured, even though, sadly, he himself did not. On October 4th, 1974, a deed shows the property transferred to Mary E. Hause on the death of Nelson Leroy Hause at age 68. Mary E. Hause continued to live there for another 30 years before she passed away in 1994. The next deed shows that the property was sold to Scott William Heibarger after the death of Mary E. Hause. I have no record of Mr. Heibarger's plans, but the next deed shows the property acquired by Catherine M. Paul after foreclosure. Catherine Paul was, and still is, an artist and craftsperson. I was able to contact her for her recollections of the place when she moved in. She said that a lot of cleanup was needed and that the first floor still contained a lot of leftover signs from the grocery store. When she bought the house, it was still using the oil burner and chimney. With the help of her father, she said she was able to make a number of improvements, including the installation of a heat pump in 2012. Apparently there had been radiators from before, but they were gone by the time I moved in. There were leftover pipes and some holes in the floors that had been filled with corks where the radiators had been. And there is still one radiator behind the washing machine which I just can't reach. Miss Paul eventually married and changed her name to Catherine Toothman. She was sorry to relocate in June of 2016, but she continues creating her art. The next owner was listed as Jeffrey D. Taylor, a photographer. One of my next-door neighbors recalls the brief existence of a photography studio at 132 Wayside, but it wasn't there for long because on October 31st, 2018, the property was sold to William A. Rader. Mr. Rader's obituary, dated August 2, 2021, did not specifically list his occupation, but a Facebook site had him working at Fitzgerald Auto Mall in Frederick, Maryland. The obituary stated that he was born in 1975 and was a wonderful artist. In addition, it noted that he greatly cared for animals, especially his cat, Asylum. The caption on his Facebook photo of Asylum shows that he also had a sense of humor. It was through Mr. Rader's sister that I bought the house at 132 Wayside Avenue in 2022, and that marked the beginning of my curiosity about its history. This documentary has been my attempt to honor that history.